all over the world. Um, Thank you for joining us here on blackdoctor.org. And it is May, as we know, just a couple of days ago, it was Mother's Day. And so this is, well, technically it's Women's Health Week, but we're going to call it Women's Health Month, right? And so we are jumping off our Women's Health Summit. This is our second annual Women's Health Summit, where we give women, particularly Black women, women of color, all the information that they can get in the 5 panels we have scheduled for you today. So we're going to kick this first one off with skin and beauty, skin and hair panel. Then we've got a panel on obesity. We've got a panel on HPV and cervical cancer. We've got a panel on fibroids and fertility. And then we wrap it up with a panel on menopause. And so we've got 5 panels back to back today. So that is fantastic. We're looking forward to all of that. So stick around, get a pencil and pad, because we're going to have a lot of useful information for you, your friends, and family, all geared for Black women and women of color. So I see some people are lining up there in the comment section. So I will say this, that number one, if you would, please let us know where you're watching from. We'd like to know where people are watching us from all over the world. So let us know that. Number two, if you know somebody that needs this information, please like it and share it on your page. And then number three, if you have any questions, please drop that in the comments and we will get them answered. So our first panel is called No More Misinformation, Overcoming Myths About Black Women's Hair and Skin. So sit back, relax. We got our best dermatologist, and that is Dr. Brooke Jackson. She is with Skin Wellness Dermatology Associates in North Carolina. So if you're there in Durham, Chapel Hill, Raleigh area, you can kind of get around. It's Durham, though, right? That's where you're based out of.
Durham, yes, Durham.
That's right. And she is a board certified dermatologist. She is also a dermatologic surgeon, and she is a healthy skin advocate. So all of those great things. And she is a great friend of blackdoctor.org. So Dr. Brooks, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. We got a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. Because when you start talking about hair and skin, and just some of the things over the years that you have been with us, one of the things that I learned that people don't even think about is that your skin is the largest organ, right? That's your largest organ. So I did have to learn that. So it's not that liver or stuff, all these other, the colon. No, it's your skin. And so we have to get in the mindset that the skin is an organ and it is going to respond to the things that we do, namely the things that we eat and the things that we apply and what is exposed to. And so those are kind of the big overarching, and then we're going to get deeper into some of the myths and misconceptions that we have, particularly as people of color, with regards to our skin, what we can do, what we can't do, what we should be doing. And then when we talk about hair, we're also going to talk about how we should be approaching that. And I know Dr. Brooke has some thoughts about that. And we're going to help you understand what you need to be doing in order to maximize your skin health and your hair health. So we're good. Thank you, Kaisha, Las Vegas. Joyce, I see you from Moderna, California. So we got our West Coast folks joining us. Shout out to the West Coast. All right. So first question, Dr. Brooks, is how do cultural norms and beauty standards impact Black women's hair and skin health? And what can be done to promote a more inclusive and diverse definition of beauty? So we're going to come out the box with a hard one.
Yeah. Great question. And it is a deep and lengthy conversation. And so, hair and skin are signs of beauty. It's really the first thing that people see, and it's your calling card. And whether you like it or not, we live in a judgmental society. And so people will take one look at you without even your saying a word and make a judgment about you based on what your hair looks like and or what your skin looks like. And that can actually translate into your ability to get a job, your ability to get a partner. And so it is really, really very important. And that's one of the aha moments that I had in dermatology, is that we are very much in the self-esteem business because of that. And, I see patients who have poor self-esteem and just, certainly I always try and connect them with a therapist, but making their skin look better automatically will improve the way that they feel about themselves. And so the other piece of that is often because of social media, because of media in general, in advertising and marketing, we are told or beauty is defined for us because those are the images that we see on commercials and magazines.
Hmm.
And for a very, very long time, we did not see images that looked like us. And so automatically there is the feeling or the undertone that you are not beautiful because you don't see a brown person on the people's most beautiful, magazine cover. Now you do. I mean, Lupita Nyong'o has been on there. Denzel Washington, he's beautiful. He's been on there. And so, now we're starting to see brown images associated with the word beautiful. And that does a tremendous amount of self esteem boost, even for little girls and women in general. Same thing with hair. For years and years and years, the ideal of beauty was long, straight hair,
Right.
fair skin, light eyes, blonde hair. And now we are embracing, and it's not just us, it's you know beauty industry is embracing more ethnic features, and so therefore it is much more comfortable. There are lots of products. Every company that I know right now is focused on brown skin and hair because they know that Black women also spend a lot of money on their skin and hair. And so, I think we are finally getting to the point where there are some good options. We got a lot of ground to make up, but, people should feel comfortable now being their own selves.
Well, look, yeah, that was a tough question, and you answered succinctly and perfectly, right? And so you're right. We are, I'm saying we as kind of part of this conversation, but there is that self-esteem that comes with that, right? And so you're absolutely right. Um, but in as much, why then, if we know that how our skin looks, how our hair looks, has an impact on how others perceive us and how we perceive ourselves, why then do you think it's so hard for people to recognize that they need to add seeing the dermatologist to their regular kind of routine when they're going to the doctor?
I think part of that is people likely don't fully understand what we as dermatologists do.
Okay.
Number one, we are doctors. We go to medical school. I have an MD degree. Right? So
Right.
a lot of people don't understand that we're actually medical doctors. So, dermatology is by definition the study of diseases of the hair, skin, and nails. And so we are far and away, that's what we do in residency after medical school is 3 years of residency. That's what we do all day, every day. So just as you would go to a cardiologist if you had a heart problem, your first stop, if you have a skin problem, should be your dermatologist. That's what we do all day, every day. And so what that translates into is us being able to make a diagnosis more quickly and get you on the right treatment plan much more quickly rather than the shot in the dark approach, which is a waste of time and money. And secondly, I think a lot of people believe dermatology is only about cosmetic services. Now, we certainly do a lot of that, and dermatologists have actually developed the large majority liposuction, injection fillers, Botox, all that stuff, lasers, all the field of dermatology. With that said, it is still a medical subspecialty. And so we take care of eczema, as issues related to allergies and asthma. We take care of skin cancer. And so this is, by the way, National Skin Cancer Awareness Month, and we can talk about that in brown people.
Right.
But skin is your largest immune organ, and it often relays what is going on internally. And so if you have a thyroid problem, we may be able to see some of that on your skin or in your hair.
Well, you and I talked about this before the show because we know that our beloved Dr. Renee is a big asthma and allergy specialist. And so we kind of talked about bringing her into this conversation and to talk about how allergies impact the skin and hair. So if she wants to, she's backstage. So if she wants to jump in and ask a question about allergies, you're more than welcome to, Dr. Renee. But at any time, if you want to jump in here. But my next question for you, Dr. Brooke, is what are some of the common hair and skin concerns that Black women face? So we're going to kind of boil them down. These aren't all of them. So
Yeah.
you got to put that disclaimer out there. These aren't all of them, but these are the most common that Black women face.
Yeah. And let me also do a disclaimer that this conversation is general information and is not intended to diagnose or treat. So,
Right.
so
Right.
with that said, I run a hair loss clinic, right? Once a month, I see all hair loss patients. And so, alopecia is a medical term for hair loss. And that is far and away probably the number one issue I have with patients who are coming in with hair concerns. And alopecia can be devastating. So it, and we talked previously about Jada Pinkett Smith and her issues with alopecia. And that we generally divide alopecia into two separate categories. One is scarring alopecia, which there's actually scar formed around the hair follicle, and the other is a non-scarring alopecia. And those can be reasons, for example, deficiencies in vitamins, or poor hair styling, not washing your hair frequently enough, otherwise known as seborrheic dermatitis. You can have thyroid problems. All of those are non-scarring alopecias. Scarring alopecia always is associated with some inflammation. And whenever there's inflammation, we do worry about the long-term effect on the health of the hair follicle. And that can actually lead to permanent hair loss. And so it's really, really important, if people feel that they are losing their hair or their hairstylist said something, to make sure that you get evaluated by a dermatologist, because there are different treatments. But first and foremost, we need to make a diagnosis. And sometimes that is done with a procedure called a biopsy, where we put a little bit of numbing medication in and take a small piece out and send it to a lab so we can actually see the types of cells that are around your hair follicle. But often a lot of it can be made just by visual diagnosis and the patient's history. And so it is really important, if you're going to go to a dermatologist, really to try and put together the timeline and the history, what you may or may not have used to treat it, if there's new medications, if you had some health issues or surgeries. All of this is really important to trying to get the full story so we can come up with the proper diagnosis.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to add my little 2 cents on the end of that. So what Dr. Brooke is saying in a very nice way is you should go see the dermatologist before you buy any products with regards to if you're experiencing hair loss. And so, coming from a person that has follically challenged, I can speak to that directly in saying that that was something that I learned, because even as I started losing my hair, I started buying all these different products. I started going scouring the internet and getting all these great, what I thought was great advice. And I thought this worked and I thought that worked. And really, what I should have done is gone to a dermatologist and had the type of alopecia that I was experiencing diagnosed, and then let them work with my dermatologist to come up with a plan. And then that helps you be more targeted when you're looking at these products, because they're all going to sell and sound good. And then people are going to share their stories about what worked for them, because they particularly had the type of alopecia that was specific for that product. Whether they went to a dermatology or not, they just could have had that shot in the dark and it landed, and it worked for them. And then they go and they share that on the internet, and then everybody goes and tries to do it, and it doesn't work as much. So, really, what you should be doing is, if you're starting to notice some alopecia or hair loss, you should go to make an appointment with a dermatologist, be proactive, make that appointment, and then get it diagnosed, and then start looking at products and treatment plans, working with your dermatologist, and not just buying what you see or what somebody says on the internet. Is that about the layman's term of what you just said, Doc?
Yeah, and I would emphasize that again, because I see patients all the time that have had hair loss for a while. And I guess the other point I would make is, don't hide it, right? So if you see something, say something. If your stylist sees something, listen, because it's important to get an early intervention so that we can save your hair follicles and hopefully have a complete recovery. But far too often, I have patients who come in and they've been wearing a wig, or they've been wearing protective styles, which are not protective. They're convenient. They're not protective at all. But it's really camouflaging the problem. And the other piece of that is, often some of these protective styles prevent you from accessing your scalp. They prevent you from actually properly cleaning your scalp. and or applying medication to your scalp. And so if you put your hair away in braids or weave for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 or 4 months, that's a problem. So you really do need to make sure that you can access your scalp, clean your scalp, just like you would never go 3 months without taking a shower or washing your body. Your
Mhm.
scalp is skin. It still needs to be washed. It needs to be cleansed, and it cannot not be cleansed for 2 or 3 months.
Absolutely. Look, wash your hair, just wash your skin. Your skin, again, it's an organ. How you treat it is going to determine how it responds. So Doc, how can we promote greater awareness of the importance of skin health and early detection of something like skin cancer
Yeah.
among Black women? Because we've got these myths,
Yeah.
and I call them the melanin myth, right? About we got melanin, so that's protecting us from skin cancer, so we don't have to wear SPF. If we do, it's just so we can tan it up. But help people dispel that myth, and then what are what are those things that could be leading and looking like early warning signs of skin cancer?
Yeah, so I would say not just skin cancer. We can certainly talk about that for a minute. So skin cancer, while it is much more prevalent in patients who've got fair skin, Caucasian patients, Irish, English, Northern European patients, it absolutely happens in people who have brown skin. Bob Marley died of a melanoma, which is a very deadly type of skin cancer. So it absolutely does happen. One of the challenges is brown people believe that it cannot happen in brown skin. And so, therefore, don't wear sunscreen, fine to go out to the beach, lay out, all of these things. And those are all issues or lifestyle practices that will put you more at risk. The other places, and let me just sort of talk about skin cancer for a second. There are basically three different types of skin cancer that we see very commonly. The first type is called basal cell carcinoma. The second type is called squamous cell carcinoma. And the third and most deadly type is called malignant melanoma. Basal cell makes up the majority of the types of skin cancer. It is usually sun exposed areas, so on the face, balding men on the forehead, the ears. So generally, we tend to see it in areas where there's a lot of sun exposure. Squamous cell, while that also may be true, and I would say 80% of all skin cancers are basal cell. Squamous cell makes up about another 16% of skin cancers. And while we do tend to see that much more commonly in sun exposed areas, what is interesting is in African Americans and in Asians, it is more commonly seen where the sun does not shine. So, not all
Mm-hmm.
skin cancer is related to sun exposure. Some of it may be immune issues, but we also know that people who have HPV or warts are an increased risk of developing squamous cell carcinoma in the area where the wart is. So that might be a vaginal area, that may be anal, right? So if you see something that is not healing well, that is bleeding without provocation, don't ignore it. Those are all things that need to be checked. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but you don't want to sit on something thinking it's okay. Bleeding is not normal. And something that is growing quickly is not normal. Something that was never there before usually is not normal.
Right.
Right. And so, for completion's sake, the third type of skin cancer is called a melanoma. And those make up about 4 to 6% of the skin cancers that we see in the United States. However, they are much more deadly. And in African Americans, they tend to occur more commonly what we call acrolentigenous. So those are hands and feet. And, so those are the areas like if you have a mole on your foot that is changing, we worry about that. Bob Marley's story was that he was a soccer player and he had a lot of trauma to his feet. Theoretically, he had a bruise that was not healing, right? So I'm a
Mhm.
runner. I've run 10 marathons. I've had plenty of bruises on my toenails, but they grow out over the course of 3 or 4 months as my nail grows out. And so that's what you want to see if you lift weights or you run or you play tennis and you get a bruise on your nail. You want to see that bruise moving forward toward the end of your toe over the course of about 3 or 4 or 5 months. If it does not move, then it really does need to be looked at, especially if it's been there for more than about a month or so. And so, melanomas, all skin cancers, are treatable when they are caught early. So that is the other reason. Don't sit on it. If, I always tell patients, I would much rather, take a look at it. You call me and you're worried about something. We take a look, I pat you on the back and you say it's fine, or we do a biopsy, rather than you sit at home going, oh, if it's still here next month, I'll make an appointment, or, I'll wait, I'll wait. Get the answer, get the treatment, move on.
Could some of that be a result of that kind of vanity kind of thought that people have about dermatology? And so they just kind of say, and especially if it's an area that's typically covered, like your foot, you can put a shoe over it. If you got this bruise, but you're like, it'll go away. But even though it's not going away, it's
Yeah.
easier just to put a shoe on it versus going to go get it checked out.
But yeah, I've written 4 book chapters on skin cancer, skin of color, and I will say that, as a field in dermatology, we spend a lot of, or have historically spent a lot of our time and effort educating people about skin cancer. And again, this is National Skin Cancer Awareness Month. I would be remiss in my duties if I did not mention it. With that said, I think, the people who are most at risk, Caucasians, Irish, Northern, they hopefully get it by now, because, you know, so much effort has been put toward that segment of the population. Now we are seeing a little bit more of a shift. I'm looking at all these sun protection companies that all are putting out products now with the little brown person on there, or they have the colors of the rainbow on there. So from a marketing standpoint, they're starting to get it. They're starting to be more inclusive, but it's two and two. We got to put it together, right? Just because it's on the shelf, we need you to go and buy it and use it. So, we need you to listen to and not think that this can't possibly happen to me. Right. And I will share with you the other places where we tend to see skin cancer is an area of previous trauma. For example, God forbid you had breast cancer and you had radiation. Radiation sites are at increased risk of squamous cell carcinoma. If you had a thermal burn, let's say when you were a kid, you were in the fire and you had to have you had to have skin graft. In those areas where you had some sort of trauma previously, increased risk of squamous cell carcinoma. So if you've ever had a wound that was fully healed and then it becomes unhealed, unprovoked, it should be looked at. And so, I would say get to know your body, get to know the things that are on your body, your bumps, your lumps, your moles, and then you would recognize if something changes or if it was never there before. And those are all, we're not expecting you to make a diagnosis at home, but what we do want you to know is if something is different for you.
Well, let's stay right there in terms of talking about skin and especially people of color, women of color, and skin. I've been told, so I'm going to kind of bring up one of those myths, and I have been told that discoloration, like dark areas around the neck, uh, near the ankle, could be early warning signs of some of diabetes. Is that true, or is that another myth?
So discoloration, the wastebasket term of discoloration can mean many things.
Okay.
And so there is a particular rash called acanthosis nigricans, which is not just discoloration, there's a little texture to it. It feels a little velvety or a little bit rough.
Okay.
Often we will see that on the backs of the neck. Sometimes we'll see it on the cheeks. Sometimes you can see it on the backs of people's hands. But that is often associated with people who are diabetic, pre diabetic, have some insulin resistance, PCOS, so that whole group of people. I usually, when I see that, I talk to patients about their history for those conditions. I want to make sure that they've been checked by their primary care doctor or their OBGYN. And, I am also, let's face it, the United States has an obesity problem.
Right.
And, we like our processed foods and all of those. We have a diabetes problem. And so, whatever we can do from a food is medicine standpoint to minimize risk factors will benefit every organ, right? Every single disease process is inflammatory. So, whether that is high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, eczema, aging, it is an inflammatory process. And so, if we are chronically putting our bodies in a state of inflammation by eating a lot of sugar, eating dairy is one of the worst things you could do for your skin. I always tell patients, get rid of your dairy. Even meat, dial back
Mhm.
the meat. We were not meant to be meat eaters, right? We don't have those big incisors like lions do or tigers do. And so we have to kind of go with how we were made to manage. And that means more plants, less meat, less packages. But all of those things will make our bodies live in a state of less inflammation. And while it may not cure your diabetes or high blood pressure, it will make you put you in a better situation to handle it better.
Okay. All right. So we're going to stay right there on the skin. So as you also know that this month is also Asthma and Allergy Awareness Month, and we know that the skin can be really sensitive to allergies, right? Particularly um, rashes and things of that nature. So talk to when you're talking about what we put into our bodies. Sometimes we think of allergies in terms of like what I'm going through right now, which is congestion, eyes itching. We don't think about what the impact it has on our skin. So let's talk a little bit about allergies, and then we'll talk after that. We'll talk about other skin conditions like eczema and whatnot.
Yeah. So there's different types of allergies, right? And there absolutely is an overlap between dermatology and allergists. And a lot of patients don't know who they should start with. And so environmental allergies like dust, pollen, dust mites, food allergies, that is typically the realm of the allergist. And often those are the same groups of people actually that may have seasonal allergies. And so we call them atopics. And typically these are people who may have asthma, seasonal allergies, hay fever, sinus problems. And I will tell those patients it's the same disease process, it just affects a different organ, right? So eczema is technically like asthma of your skin, right?
Wow.
And
Okay.
so it is not uncommon for someone who has asthma to also have eczema, or to have someone in their family, in their gene pool, who has any of those things: asthma, hay fever, sinus problems, seasonal allergies. I always tell patients, if you have one of those things, you are prone to developing all of those things. And they
Okay.
may hit you at different times of your life. So often little kids may have more eczema issues. They're a little bit rashy. Everybody in North Carolina has allergies and sniffing, and I call it the yellow snow. The pollen's awful here.
Yes.
And so there will be times of the year where that may be a little bit worse for you. For example, I lived in Chicago for 10 years, and winters are very, very awful there. And so everyone's eczema flares up when it's very, very cold. There are some people who get worse in the summertime, but the large majority of people get worse in the winter. Versus seasonal allergies, we tend to see that with a little bit of an uptick when the pollen starts falling. And so we had a very, very mild winter this year, and we had a very prolonged spring this year. And so people
Mhm.
are still miserable. I mean, it's been awful. And I'm sure Dr. Renee can comment on that, but it's just been a really tough allergy season. But the rubbing, the scratching, the pollen, it's all connected.
But that eczema as an allergy of the skin, I mean, it's an asthma of the skin. That is one way, a really great way of putting it, so people can really kind of understand that, because it was definitely, I would see, and there was a young lady that when I was growing up in my church, and she had a really bad case of eczema, right? And so it was the flaking, the scratching, and it was tougher. She really tough for her, and we never knew what it was. And we know, like with asthma, there's that childhood asthma that you typically grow out of it. Is that something that is similar to eczema as well, where you can have like some dry skin areas, but as you continue to mature, you could grow out of that?
You don't ever really grow out of it, right? So, I think it may dial itself down a little bit. But I tell my patients that because a lot of people will come in with, very, very rashy and their eczema is flaring. And I go through the products that you're using. I go through what's going on in the home, what you're eating. And, they go to, get the fruit fragrance, this, that, and the other. They got the candles going in the house. They got the fragrance body lotion. And like, hold up a minute. So let's talk about that. The fragrance usually comes from a plant, rose flavored, blah, 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 lavender, blah, blah, blah. You and Mother Nature don't get along very well, right? That's
Mhm.
why you're sniffing and you're scratching when all the pollen is coming out, because it's pollen from what? Flowering plants. What do those flowering plants do? They become perfume, right? And so the last thing you want to do is put on fragranced anything. You and Mother Nature do not get along very well. So unscented for you.
Wow. Well, yeah. Hey, it's hard to tell black folks that we like to smell good now. Come on.
I
It- that, that's gonna be a tough one. That's gonna be a tough sell.
I
So
tell people, look, if I'm the one in Target lifting up and sniffing, right? And I tell my patients, look, as long as they don't catch you, just sniff. Like if you can smell it, don't use it.
it's a good point. It's a good point. So you mentioned earlier, and I've been noticing this too, that there has been like more diversity in how hair and skin products are being marketed. How can we continue? That's more of an industry question, I guess. But do you think that this is something that will kind of last long term, or is this kind of the marketing du jour that we're happening?
I think there's a little bit of both. Um, but with that said, I will share with you because I lecture on this all the time. I mean, the demographics of the United States are changing.
Mhm.
And it is expected that by 2050, which is not that far from now,
Right,
greater than 50% of people in the United States are going to be brown,
right,
right? And so, I share the same demographic or same information with my colleagues that you need to be comfortable taking care of brown skin, because if you do not, you will not have any patients in your practice. And the reality
mm,
is people of color do spend a large amount of money on skin and hair products. And these beauty companies understand that. And so, whether they are
right,
doing it because it's in vogue or doing it because it's a financial decision, okay, do it, right? And continue to do it. And I don't see anybody making fewer products for brown skin, right? Because they know that
right.
it's a moneymaker. And I don't work for any of these companies, but I've just, I notice the trends, and every single company now has lines and SKUs that are, made to target skin of color and issues specific to skin of color or hair of color, textured hair.
Well, that's good, and that right because I mean even we're seeing this in you talking about that demographic shift in the country. There's been some backlash, right? And so we've seen some legislation where black women or and their allies have had to go to particular whether it was stateside and say, hey, having a natural hairstyle is not considered unprofessional, right? And even we had to go to Google and say, look, you cannot put in Google. If you Google unprofessional hair, what you're going to see is a whole lot of black hairstyles, natural black hairstyles. And so that bias is even written into the algorithm at Google to see those images, right? And so, and that legislation that says you cannot be discriminated against if you're wearing locks or a natural hairstyle because of that backlash for against people of color. And so we're definitely seeing that shift. And there is there's a portion of the population that is not really happy about that shift happening here and are trying to put ways in order to slow the progress of women and black and people of color in general with
Yeah, and
regard
I
to
would say the legislation that you're referring to is called the Crown Act, CROWN Act. And I would suggest that all of your listeners go to the the Crown Act. You can Google it to maybe thecrownact.org and sign the petition. And basically, the petition is to illegalize discrimination based on your hair. And
Right.
so everyone with textured hair needs to go ahead and sign that petition, so that this can become the law in the United States. And the president has already said once it gets to his desk, he will sign it, but it's got to get through Congress.
Hmm. Okay, so talk to me about these letters and number combinations, right? Because I even had, you know, my kids telling me about you got 4C and this kind of, is that an arbitrary system that somebody just put together that has no bearing on dermatology whatsoever? It's just something that we use in kind of the consumer marketplace in order to sell products and to try to make people, feel some kind of way about their hair texture, hair products,
Yes.
whatnot. Should we be paying attention to all those numbers and letters?
No.
Okay.
I think it is a way to categorize your curl pattern so that it will theoretically make it easier for you to choose products made for your curl pattern. But from a dermatology standpoint or a diagnostic standpoint, does it matter? No, it does not.
Okay. So y'all, you hear that? It's just really about your curl pattern. So you gotta let all that go, let the rest of that go, and your curl pattern probably gonna come from the something outside of your control, and that's the two people that came together to make you. And so a lot of that is genetic, and then you kind of go from there. Sorry. All right. So as we're here with Dr. Brooke Jackson of the Skin Wellness Dermatology Associate at Dr. Brooke Derm, as you can see there on the screen on social media. She is fantastic. So just to recap, number one, black skin does burn. You do need sunscreen when you go out. And so Doc, help people understand how often, because I know we go to the beach and we plan to be at the beach all day, and we put that one application on and we say, I'm good. I put on sunscreen. How often should we be reapplying sunscreen products?
Okay, so let's back it up, back it up. Okay, let's talk about sunscreen for a second. So when you go to the store, and this is how to buy a sunscreen. It is confusing. There are lots of numbers, lots of letters associated, and this is where it actually does matter. So SPF means sun protective factor, and that is a rating system that is associated with UVB light. And so they're basically two wavelengths of light that affect our skin, UVA and UVB. The SPF number refers to UVB. And that is, standardly you may see something in the store 15, 30, 45, higher numbers for sure. And so there is no rating system for UVA. Both of these wavelengths can cause skin cancer. And so you want to make sure that you have a sunscreen that says broad spectrum, because that way it is going to cover UVA and UVB. The texture is a very personal choice. And so I always tell people when they ask, like, what is the best sunscreen? The best sunscreen for you is a sunscreen that you will wear. And so as long as it has a broad spectrum sunscreen, an SPF of probably 30 or greater, depending on what you're going to do, whether it is a lotion or a cream or a spray or a gel, a lot of that is personal choice. But I would guide you to one thing or another depending on what you're doing. If you have very oily skin, you probably want something that is a gel or even a spray. I use a spray when I go running. I spray it in my hands and put it on my face like this. If you have very, very dry skin, you may want to go with something that is a lotion or a cream, something that's a little bit heavier in texture because you want the moisture properties from that. Different things for different seasons. And so I will often change my sunscreen based on your wardrobe, really. So in the spring and the summer, you lighten things up, and you can lighten your products up in the spring and the summer just as you would your wardrobe. In the heavier or cooler months of the year, you may want to go with something that's a little bit more moisturizing and so a little bit more creamy. The second piece of that is waterproof and sweatproof. So those terms should be gone. It now should say water resistant or sweat resistant, and there should also be a number that says water resistant for 40 minutes, sweat resistant for 40 minutes or 80 minutes. And so, what that means is you're good for 40 minutes. And so, let's say you're out running a marathon and you're going to be out there for 5 hours, as I am. That means you literally should be applying your sunscreen probably twice. You put it on before you start the race and probably sometime in the middle, about 2, 3 hours, you need to reapply. The water resistant means if you're going to be at the beach and you're in and out of the water, it will stay on you for about 40 minutes. Now, let's talk about beaches. There are a lot of beaches that are now banning sunscreen because sunscreen, when they get in the water, can be bad for coral. And we have a lot of coral reef protection. And so you do have, there are usually signs that are up on the beach, but you do have to check depending on where you're going for your vacation. So we've talked about SPF. We want a broad spectrum. Once you get over SPF 50, um, it's not significantly much more protective than like a 30. So if the 30, if the 50 is on sale and the 100 is not, get the 50. You'll be fine. You don't need to spend the extra money for the SPF 100. Because the other piece of that is if you are using something with a very high number, there is a false sense of security that you're good. You're still only good for 2 to 3 hours. And so, again, there's no insignificant increase in the benefit of a higher SPF once you get over SPF 50. So I wouldn't worry about the 85s or the hundreds. It's just more money and you're not going to get significantly more benefit. So you want to make sure that you put on enough. And so let's say you're going outside in shorts and t-shirt. You need a shot glass, and that is, everybody knows what that is, a shot glass full. That is the amount of sunscreen, 1 ounce, that should cover all of your sun exposed body parts. And the other piece of that is if you are putting that amount on and you are reapplying every 2 to 3 hours, if you go to the beach with an 8 ounce bottle of sunscreen, that should be empty by the time you come home from the beach. You should not be using that same bottle next month or next year. That means you did not apply enough sunscreen. And if you do not apply enough sunscreen, then that means you actually did not get the SPF that is labeled on the bottle. And so it's really, really important to make sure that you use enough. If you're trying to just cover your face, you take your 3 fingers and put the sunscreen on each finger, and that should be the amount that you will use to cover your face. I also tell patients to make sure, particularly women, make sure you bring your sunscreen all the way down to your chest. Make sure you get the backs of your hands. Men, if you wear short hair, backs of your neck, on your ears, because those are areas that are at high risk for skin cancer as well. If you are balding or thinning at the top, wear a hat. Make sure that you spray a little sunscreen, or you can just kind of rub it through your hair to protect your head so that you don't burn. Now let's talk about manicures for a minute. So clearly I don't do that, but when you manicure, go to manicure, and they try and put you in that light box, that is the same as a tanning booth. So that is a no bueno. My preference is that you do not use those manicure, the gel manicure light boxes. If you must do that, then I would put some sunscreen on your hands before you do it. Or you can go on Amazon and get manicure gloves. And basically, they're sun protective gloves that have little cutouts so you can still do your nails. But I would avoid the gel manicures altogether. You're muted.
Yeah, so that is great advice because like I'm like you. I don't get my nails done manicured. I just cut them and go. But I know people that do, and they get in that box. And so understanding that you need to put on either some sunscreen or those gloves, that is fantastic information to know so that way their hands are not continually exposed. Because I know women get they sometimes they get their nails done on a weekly basis, and that's a lot of exposure
Yeah.
to those rays. So yeah, okay, that's great. Um,
And even driving, put some sunscreen on your hands while you're driving, because you think about the amount of time that you're in the car. I know Atlanta traffic is awful, Chicago traffic is awful. And so people spend a significant amount of time in their car. And that adds up as far as sun damage as well.
so and I think we may have talked about this before, but I want people to understand when we're talking about when you're getting a lotion, because black folks we do use some lotion now. We do use some lotion. Is it okay to get a lotion with that has an SPF added to it as long as it's broad spectrum?
Yeah.
But still doesn't cover you for the whole day just because you put on some lotion. That just covers you for that moment. But
Yeah.
that you can do the combo.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things we've been focusing on here as we're starting to wrap up here with Dr. Jackson is there has been a significant shift in healthcare towards clinical trials, right? In terms of developing new ways, new products, and they're trying to get more people of color to participate in clinical trials. Um, how often or how much are clinical trials a part of dermatology? And are there ways for Black folks to get involved so we can have a better result when some of the new products and things come out?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's kind of a heavy question as well, right? So the history of clinical trials is not a good one.
Right.
And I'm sure we're all familiar with the Tuskegee experiment. And
Hmm.
so, the lore of the Tuskegee experiments has been passed down for generations. And so that is one of the reasons why, people don't want to participate in clinical trials. There was vaccine hesitancy, the belief that this is all testing. At the end of the day, um, what the Tuskegee experiment did for us is we now have something called informed consent.
Right.
And so, informed consent is whomever's doing the clinical trials needs to inform you of all of the risks associated, every detail about the trial. You will always have the option to say, I don't want to do this anymore. And so, really, the decision to participate in a clinical trial, a clinical study, is yours. And depending on what the trial is. So, sometimes in dermatology, it may be an injectable, sometimes it may be something by mouth. So, really, every FDA approved medication that is on the market, whether it's for dermatology, whether it's for your heart, all of these medications went through clinical trials. And some medications don't make it to circulation because there were some issues in clinical trials. And so, if you go to NIH, there is a list. You can just go to the website, and there's a list of all the active clinical trials.
Hmm.
Certainly, you can ask your dermatologist. So it really is twofold. We want to get more African American dermatologists involved in clinical trials, and the clinical trial world is a little bit of an old network, and so some of it is trying to break into those networks to allow investigators of color, who often have patients of color, who are more likely to participate in a clinical trial if their doctor looks like them.
Right.
And so, it really is a multifold problem, and one that we're working on.
Well, absolutely, and wholeheartedly agree. And I think that for our audience to recognize is that one of the things we always like to say is involvement improves outcomes, right? And so if you want to have better products, if you want to have better treatment options available to you, we have to get involved as people of color because it just the subtle differences between ethnic groups can have a big difference in terms of how a medication or a product impacts our lives. It impacts our health. And so by by us getting involved, they can say it's safe, it's got efficacy across ethnic groups, across gender or whatever. The more we can get involved, the better chance we have of having better products, and especially in a country where we're talking about by 2050 being over half people of color, we still have to get involved. Otherwise, we're going to have all these products and they're not going to really be as effective for us as they possibly could be. So, getting involved in clinical trials, that they're easy to find. We have a clinical trials resource center going to be starting here soon on blackdoctor.org. And so you can find out about all about the different types of clinical trials there. And like NIH, clinicaltrials.gov, there's a number of sites available, and there's going to be more available for you going forward. So, as we wrapping up here, we've talked about mental health and self-esteem in terms of our skin and hair. We've talked about sunscreen and how we should be getting on sunscreen and utilizing sunscreen. We've even talked about the ways we should be looking at products. So, what are your final thoughts? Where you want people to know at most about, if there was something that you say, okay, the one thing I want people to walk away with from watching this program, what is that?
Don't be afraid to see your dermatologist. We're really nice people. We're very smart. And you know, we get it, right? So again, skin is your largest immune organ, and if it involves your skin, hair, and nails, that is our wheelhouse. So whether it is hair loss, whether it is cosmetic work, whether it is eczema, warts, all of it, we take care of everything from tip to toe. Um, Secondly, is when you go to see any doctor, be open, right? Figure out what it is or why you were there. Make sure that you have a list of your medications. Make sure that you have your proper medical history. Talk to your family members. There's so many patients that I have, and I said, well, did anybody else in your family have this? And they're like, well, I don't know. Right. So, talk to your family members, understand your family medical history, because that can play a role in what's going on with you. And it's fair if you're adopted or you don't have, you don't know it, that's fine. But if you have a relationship with your relatives, I would say, let's talk about some things. And more importantly, I always tell patients, just trust the process, right? So there is no magic in any of these treatments. As dermatology, most of what we do is we treat chronic conditions. So it is really important to me that patients understand their process and what's going to make it worse and what's going to make it better. And I always engage patient involvement, because I can tell you what to do, but you got to do it. And so, some of it is you got to get on board, and your results are often going to be as good as your participation. And so, if you don't really follow the plan, you like to mix things up and kind of do your own thing, then, it's probably not going to be as great a result as it could be if you follow the plan.
Create a plan, follow the plan, see your dermatologist, be proactive and not reactive
Yes.
to seeing your dermatologist. Make that, how often should somebody see their dermatologist? Is that
It depends.
annually?
It depends. If we're talking about skin cancer, we do usually do a cancer check once a year. If you have a history of skin cancer, I will often see people back 2 to 3 times a year. For hair loss, until that's kind of, I usually see people about every quarter.
Right.
Once we get you on a plan. Acne, I like to kind of get people going. So I will see you kind of hold on to you tightly for about 3 or 4 months until we get you pretty good, and then release you to the world.
Gotcha. Okay. So it depends on the condition and the severity of that condition. And that basically, that's kind of what it sounds like. So I want to thank you, Dr. Brooke. If you want to get more information from Dr. Brooke, you see her social media handles at Dr. Brooke Derm. She also does a regular program here called Melanin Poppin', right here on blackdoctor.org. And so this is an ongoing series because we're talking about skin and hair health. We want to get our overall audience, but this is specifically this is for Black women. It really kind of get you on the right path with regards to your skin and hair health and everything that there's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of information, and I won't say misinformation, but there's a lot of stuff out there that can be harmful if not applied properly, if you don't know what you really need. And so that's why we have Dr. Brooke. Go see a dermatologist in your area, get it figured out, and so therefore you can get the best product and treatment plan for you.
And let me actually just tell you where you can find a dermatologist.
Okay.
So the website for all the board certified dermatologists I will share with you, there's a lot of people out there that say they're dermatologists, but they're not. And
Right.
so you want to make sure that you got the MD, that means you're a doctor. FAAD means Fellow of the American Academy of Dermatology, but you can go to the aad.org, which is the American Academy of Dermatology website, and you will find all board certified dermatologists on that website. And so that is a good place to start. And you can put in your zip code, and there'll be a drop down menu of people who are around you.
All right. And we'll put this on the screen so folks can see that. So there we go. AAD.org for a board certified dermatologist.
Mm-hmm.
Get you a real one, folks. You know, there's a lot of different things out there. So get your real one, AAD.org. Get your board certified dermatologist. Get everything diagnosed, and then work with them on the treatment plan. And then go buy your products, right? Then you can go buy your products, but you at least know ahead of time if there's something going on, particularly when we're talking about skin cancer as well. Don't let it linger. It's best to get it checked. Don't let it linger.
Yeah.
So thanks, Dr. Brooke.
Thank
We're going on to the next panel at the top of the hour. We're going to be talking about obesity in Black women, right? We're going to dispel some of those myths about obesity. So we've got a great panel. So stick with us. Get your pen and pad ready. So we're going on to our next panel here. It's going to be hosted by Dr. Sylvia, who does our Embrace You Hot Topics and Weight Loss program on every other Friday. So you know she's got a lot of energy. If you've watched that show, she's got a lot of energy, and she's got a fantastic panel that she's going to be hosting here. So stick with us. Top of the hour. You just got a great panel with Dr. Brooke, one-on-one with Dr. Brooke, skin and hair health. Now we're on to obesity. We'll see y'all in a little bit.
you. Right. Bye.